This is episode 19 with Kane Churko. Kevin is a fantastic producer, engineer, and great musician as well. Canadian boy and now living in Las Vegas, and has a wonderful studio called the Hideout. And he's been producing some fantastic acts, and he's a really great engineer, an all-around fine guy. I really enjoyed sitting down for a couple of hours and chatting about how Kevin got to where he is now. I hope you enjoy our conversation. It goes like this. Okay, we're here with Kane Churko. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
This is this is probably the nicest room that I've had to record a podcast in yet.
Wow, thanks.
Beautiful studio here.
Yeah.
We're at the Hideout in Las Vegas, and we were chatting. I got the tour. It's a fantastic place.
Thanks.
I'm sure you're pretty happy every day you walk in here.
It's a dream come true. It's a lot of fun. I couldn't have planned it better.
Yeah. Yeah, you think...
I mean, I could have planned it better. You can always plan it better, but really, I mean, this is like my dream studio. It's like at this point, this is my end game. I need nothing better. So now I can move on to other things and redefine what those things are. But definitely, as far as a working environment, I got my whole family around me. I got state-of-the-art studio with old classic vintage things too. I mean, it's really the best life that myself could have.
Yeah.
You know, with all the things that I do and all the things I like doing, it really is a wonderful place to be at. You know,
one of the cool things that I've noticed right away is that you're surrounded by your family here, which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I got 2 kids. One of them, Chloe, runs my studio, and by that I mean like she works hard because I do nothing. I try to do as little of that sort of thing as I can.
Yeah,
I just want to make music, and then Kane is my musical partner. And even though we don't always work on the same projects now, he is here every day. You know, he comes and checks in with me every day. I mean, I don't think many people have a life where they see their kids every single day.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then he goes back to his own room and does his thing, and, you know, we'll see each other outside on breaks and that sort of thing. And we have a project coming up. We're both working on it, so those are always fun.
So when he was growing up, obviously, was it something that you tried to get him involved with and you know, here, this is how this is done, and at a very early age, or is it something that he was just wanted to be around all the time?
No, it's the opposite of that. I tried to not get him involved at a very early age. I mean, I still try to, you know, throw him the obligatory piano lessons and stuff like that, and with my dad.
Yeah.
But didn't enforce it. In fact, to a fault. I thought, you know, I mean, my idea might have been to have him work a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But my wife's idea wasn't. She didn't think that he needed that kind of pressure on him. And so, you know, and then as I was getting older, I realized, oh, this is so tough. I mean, the music industry, there's a lot better industries to be involved in than this one, as far as financial return, as far as security, as far as longevity, pretty much anything other than having fun. I mean, anything else other than having fun is pretty sad. So I really didn't want him to be really doing this. So not only did I not help him, I almost tried to prevent him in certain ways.
Yeah.
And then once he got to a certain age and just started doing it on his own, with or without me, you know, I noticed that. And at a certain time, I said, okay, he's obviously doing this. So now I'll throw him a bone, and got him, you know, bought him a new guitar, a new computer, whatever he needed at the time, but little baby steps, like see what you can do with this.
Yeah.
And then if he did something with that, then I'd, you know, give him another key to the kingdom. And then eventually I was in a great position because my career started taking off, so then I could really help him out. But by that time, he was already proven to me that he truly wanted to do it, and just wasn't doing it because it was easy.
Yeah.
You know, because he wakes up and there's a Pro Tools rig at home.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't a Pro Tools rig at home. I didn't really have any gear till I was quite a bit older.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have a home studio. I didn't really have a lot of those things. But you know, regardless of that, he grew up in the midst of it all, no matter what I was doing, coming to the studio where I worked, watching the band that I was playing in, whatever it was. He was really immersed in music his entire life.
I know when I was young, with the family back in the day when we were making albums, when I was 7 or 8 years old, and we go into the studio, and I knew right away I wanted to be involved in it somehow. And I just remember just looking and watching the engineer constantly. First thing I knew was where the talkback button was, or just knew how to figure those things. Just one of those things I just knew at that age that, I really wanted to do this, right? And I think you just know, right? It's either a part of you or it's not a part of you.
Yeah.
So
I mean, my earliest sort of recording memory was convincing my brother Corey to go halfers with me on a 4-track, one of those Tascam 244s.
Yeah.
But while I was waiting to do that, I kept hearing about 24-track recording. I was trying to figure out what that actually meant. And I remember thinking, 24 tracks, what does that mean? And reading about it, and then in my mind trying to visualize the piece of tape and cut it into 24 sections. It took me a really long time actually just to figure out how that worked and how you could record on the same piece of tape, but not record over it. And as simple as that sounds now, I remember just that function alone. I remember lying awake at night, go, how does that work? So there must be, is that what a head is then? And so there's a head's broken up into, just not knowing. It wasn't like it is now where almost anything you want, you can dig up on the nets, on the internets and Googles, and find everything you'd ever want to know.
You hear about it, and you just Google it, and there's all the information and YouTube videos and everything you'd want to know about that particular piece of equipment or whatever technology. And back when we grew up, you'd basically just by chance, if you had to see one, it would be like, wow.
Yeah. Oh, you had to pay the price too. You had to pay studio time in order to go into the studio to find that gear that everybody can have at home now. And you only had like Mix Magazine, maybe a Canadian Musician, Electronic Magazine, Keyboard Magazine, a couple of things like that you just had to wait for once a month you would get, and you would digest and read it cover to cover. Yeah. And that was how you learned. And if you were lucky, you could work at a studio, or you were in a band that went into a studio, which was my case, and then I could ask that guy questions and try to learn until I became the ultimate thorn in those guys' sides. I'll go on record saying that if I ever produced a band that had early version of Kevin in it, I would probably hate that guy and hate that band. Yeah. Because I was just so into it, and I was one of those guys that was relentless and just, wouldn't accept no, or wanted to do it myself, thought I could do it better, and so that's a difficult place for me as producer guy now to be in. But
so let's go back. I interviewed your brother Corey, and we talked about growing up in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and so when drums was obviously your instrument from the beginning. So when did you start playing drums? How old were you?
Well, piano was my instrument from the beginning.
Was it?
So
okay.
I think when I was 4, my dad started me in piano lessons, classical Royal Conservatory style lessons. And all of us did, Corey too. Yeah. And then basically drums came about as I was around 8 or 9, I think. I can't remember exactly how I ended up doing that, to be honest with you, other than I was being enrolled in Lions Band, which is like a marching band kind of thing. And I had to choose an instrument. So it's like piano was first, and then everybody had to choose a second one. My daughter chose flute, Corey chose the guitar at a later date. And when it came my time to choose a second one, for some reason I was in Lions Band, and I looked around and said, what would I want to play? And the only thing that was really that interesting were drums. And originally they said I couldn't do that because everybody wanted to do that. Yeah. But then, they had some kind of an audition thing to see if you were suitable for it. And I guess I passed because eventually I was drummer. Yeah. And then it worked out well in our family band too, because then, my dad had a drummer in the band, in the family. Yeah. So yeah, it was just just like any kid, you kind of get thrown into it and start doing it. For me, it was perfect because Corey, as he's a guitar player, worked out well for us too, because we could complement each other on that. And my sister played piano, so we had a whole little trio.
Yeah, had it covered. So do you remember your first drum kit?
Oh yeah, Maxwin, which was made by Pearl. They made clear to say that it was made by Pearl, but it was a Maxwin set, much like a Baxter at that time. Yeah, it was an orange sparkle kit. I'd love to have that kit now. I have no idea where it is. It probably sounds horrible. But.
Well, maybe you'll find. You know what? The cool thing was, I interviewed Shane Hendrickson just a couple of weeks ago, We talked about his very first bass guitar, and I asked, he didn't have it any longer. And then the next day after I released a podcast, there's a guy in Regina has his bass guitar and contacted him. He listened to the podcast, and he's going to get it back.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Somehow I have a feeling I won't be as lucky as that. But if
not.
anybody out there in Regina or Moose Jaw has my old Orange Sparkle Maxwin drum kit, please send it home.
It's funny how something like that at the time seems very, it's not important, right? It's just like, that's that cheap kit and you don't care anymore. And then you get to a certain age, it's like, I'd love to have that back again. And you don't think of keeping it.
Well, on the other hand, it's one thing to have a guitar. It's another thing to have a 5-piece drum kit, taking up your storage space. But I mean, for me, it's a little better because I have storage room here at the studio. So it would definitely go into a position of importance to me and completely unimportant to everybody else. Kevin's first drum kit, and nobody else would care except
you need a room
me.
F for that.
I can build it.
Yeah. So obviously you toured through your teens with the family band and performed all over the place. And I know when we talked with Corey, there was a definite time where you guys decided just to move on from that and move to Vancouver. And what was that move like for you?
The move was memorable on many levels. Obviously, we were sort of leaving our family band at the time, or rather, we gave the option to our sister Kim to come out, and she didn't want to live out there.
Yeah.
And, we were young guys that just wanted to make our own way. So it was kind of exciting in the sense that it was all going to be new, and we were ready for it. We were pretty seasoned even by that time. We had already had a gig booked and planned, and so we had a game plan going out there, and then right away got involved with another guy as a backup band, and it really turned into some really great times of learning and growing. And honestly, for me, I became a much better drummer by going out there and playing with the different people I played for. Because it's one thing to just be in your own little insular world and think that you're great, but it's another thing when you start playing with people who don't think you're great, who don't care if you think you're great, and have different requirements than what your own band had. And so I had to learn how to listen to other people and how to satisfy them and just have a different perspective towards music.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty great time musically and educationally, but a bad time, financially, because, I was probably in a little worse position than the other guys in the band, in which case I had a family, so I had to make a little bit more money. I had to pay other bills besides just mine. So, it was like the best and the worst of all worlds, because I was living in a beautiful city with work that I mostly liked. But yet I had no money to go ski if I wanted to go ski. I had no money to, do a lot of the things that people go to Vancouver to do. It's like I could see it.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it unless we got a gig there on the, out at Whistler or something, and then we got a pass thrown in or something.
Yeah.
So, it was good and bad at the same time. Good for my son because Kane first started going to school out there.
Yeah.
My daughter was born out there. So, a lot of great memories.
I know we talked earlier about you getting your first 4-track. Was that your first kind of jump into recording?
No. The first one was, I wish I could remember the gentleman's name or even the studio name. I can't remember it, but it was an 8-track reel-to-reel studio in Moose Jaw.
Yeah.
And a guy there had a basement studio, an 8-channel deck, and Corey and I went in there. We bought some studio time.
Yeah.
We went in there and, did our thing for the first time, and it was pretty new, and, we were as green could possibly be. But I think we spent a day or 2 days or something, and then the guy mixed it. And again, I wish I could remember his name. I can't. My dad would probably know. And I still got that demo. To be honest with you, somewhere. Yeah. I have a couple of big sort of plastic containers of memorabilia that at one point I'll check out. I'm pretty sure I have a version of that somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think someone might have digitized it for me at some point too. I mean, I'm not really a good collector, and I don't do a lot of photos and that sort of thing. So I'm not really great at that. But lucky for me, some other people around me have kind of collected stuff. And so eventually they gave it to me and I put it into my box.
Yeah.
But the two most important things happened on that sort of experience. One was, I got to record myself for the first time in Corey, and it was like a production. It was like we did overdubs and the vocals separate from the band, and so that was really exciting. So that gave me my first taste. That was sort of I've been chasing that dragon ever since.
Yeah.
But the second thing that happened was interesting. I remember playing the song. I mean, I thought it was awesome, right? You're 12 years old or whatever it is, thinking this is going to change the world of rock as we know it.
Yeah.
And I remember my friend, I do remember his name, Ken Davidson, who I played it for him, and he said, and he was into bands like Judas Priest and that sort of thing at that time. He says, "Why does it sound like you're sitting down?" I thought, wow, why does it sound like I'm sitting? I was sitting down.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my first producer. Not that I was producer, like my brother and I both did it, but it was my first sort of feedback of someone who knows nothing about nothing as far as music goes.
Yeah.
Giving me an honest reply, an honest report. And I thought, you know what? He's kind of right. It does sound like that. So that's when I realized, okay, recording the studio is not just playing live. We're not playing for people. There's no energy. You have to create it. You have to make it. You have to be thinking a lot more than just executing a part.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those two things are pretty important if I think about it.
That's an interesting comment.
It is.
Because you think about it now.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ken Davidson.
Well, even now, everyone, still, in most cases, you sit down and play.
Yeah.
And nowhere else do you do that. I mean, you're sitting down in the studio or you're on stage, and unless you're on the drums or keyboard player or something, you're standing up and you play way differently.
Yeah. Well, and maybe as a drummer, I didn't think about it at that time because I was always sitting down.
Yeah.
But the other side of that is that you get better at your trade. Like even now, I mean, I'm never standing up. Even when I'm singing, I'm not even standing up, which is probably the worst thing I could do now. But I'm just too lazy. But the thing is that you do, as a professional, you do learn how to channel that energy. I guess, to make it seem like you're standing up. And most of my guitar players, I mean, occasionally a guy wants to get up and actually, move. But most of the guys are sitting down. But the difference is that they can channel how it feels when they're standing up into their music, and they can get that energy, excitement into it once you're good. And you can do it for a lot longer of time because you're not standing up.
Yeah.
And so, and anybody that works with me knows that it can sometimes be a long day.
Okay. Yeah. I better sit down.
You better sit down. But the key thing about that is it doesn't even matter if you're sitting, standing, lying down. What the key thing is what you're representing on tape or on hard drive now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the end product. It's however
how
you
does
get
it
there,
make you feel? Does it make you feel like standing up? You
Yeah.
know? I mean, those are the most important things that producers should ask themselves. Not is that vocal in tune, or is it's about one thing. For regular people who aren't musicians and aren't technical people, it's do they want to play it again? Does it make them feel some kind of an emotion? And even if it's a bad emotion, it's probably still a good thing.
Yeah.
A lot of my bands succeed on anger.
Yeah.
So if they're, if they make people angry, that's, mission accomplished.
Yeah, that's the deal. So let's jump back to Vancouver. You were playing with the Underground Outlaws. Now, interesting story. I heard you had a country side to you, but you also had the other version of the band, which is a rock side, right? Is that how it worked?
Yeah. Yeah. That was our first error.
Yeah.
I mean, the things I know now, but yeah, I mean, the thing is we really came from a musical point of view at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, we all loved rock and grew up on it and thrived on it. I mean, all of us, Mike, Corey, and Shane and I all. But we, and particularly me, I could make a little bit more money playing country in a club than I could rock.
Yeah.
And so really what we wanted to succeed as a rock band, but we knew, we could afford more studio time, more gear, whatever, if we played country. And even though we still liked it, and even though we were part of it and had done it all our lives, maybe it wasn't as passionate about it because we were younger.
Yeah.
Although, that's not technically true, because we all became great country musicians in a certain sense that you can't do without loving what you're doing.
Yeah.
We weren't just putting in time, we were learning it, and we were, listening to it too. But we're 1 years old. We're much more into Van Halen than we probably were into Ricky Skaggs at that time.
Yeah.
So we had two bands, and we thought that was a cool thing, and we thought that people would respond to that, the same exact guys with different clothes, different band name, and really it took twice the amount of work, and it took twice the amount of money in a sense. But again, we were thinking from our hearts and weren't necessarily thinking from our minds, even though at that time all the, let's say, the educated A&R people and the industry, let's call it, couldn't get their head around that. Well, who are you then? Are you that, or are you this? Exactly. And these are the same things I would ask an artist I'm working with now. Yeah. So now I get to experience it from another point of view. But we were all that. And the reality is that truly was us.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, maybe we didn't succeed for different reasons, but we were being true to ourselves at least. And I think that was a good thing.
And probably now, if you look back as a producer and engineer, it's probably a great knowledge to have both sides of the fence, knowing, because there's things that country guys do that rock guys never do. And there's things rock guys do that country guys don't do at all. But as an approach as a producer, and even in your years now, I know you just did a country project, is that still know it really well. You understand it. And I think there's parts that cross over. There may be something in your producing wise that you'd probably pull in from your country roots that probably other guys wouldn't have that in their wheelhouse, right?
Oh yeah. That life, that country life, the family band life, and even the Underground Outlaws, that was so invaluable to what I'm doing now, even the way I arrange vocals. Rock wasn't really arranging vocals at that time in that sense, like country did. Just picking out harmonies and being able to kind of orchestrate that, I've really used that in this age, and not just that, musically too. And it was funny, about a year ago or so, I was writing a song with my son, and I had this intro riff, guitar riff, and he just looks at me and goes, "That's kind of a country riff. You should just turn that into a country song, Dad." And so I did, and that became one of the songs that we did on Corey Marx's album, is that it came from that, and not from me saying, now I got to write a country song. That's just who I am too. Yeah. And so it's surprising when it comes out, and even a lot of my heavy bands will always comment on the countryness of it.
Oh yeah.
Even though people outside of that would never consider that.
No.
They know.
Yeah.
And to the point where one of the first rock guys I worked with said, "I don't want my vocals to sound like Alabama." But again, that was very, I remembered that. So even now I think about that. And that guy's name is Carson Cole from Alberta, and he was one of the first guys that we sort of backed up as a band. And, that made a lot of sense, and it still makes sense now. And I'm always careful now when I'm arranging harmonies not to make it sound like Alabama when I'm working with a metal band or a rock band. And there are distinct differences between that. And I can sort of change that just based on all the education I've had of doing it both ways.
So when you started doing lots of recording and that with the Underground Outlaws, Shane mentioned to me in the podcast that you guys would go into a studio there in Vancouver and just continuously work all the time. Is that sort of where you just kind of started jumping in as an engineer, or was it a little bit before that?
Well, I should have listened to Shane's podcast before just to make sure I was on the same page. But yeah. I'll give it to you as I remember it.
Sure.
And of course some stuff before Shane was there. But yeah, when we were in Vancouver, it was like a nonstop, recording machine. Whether it was at home with our 8-track, or whether eventually we didn't win a band wars, or we won a band wars too. And so some studio there was giving us some free time.
Yeah.
But it was like midnight on kind of thing. So it was like we had to work all night. we'd play in a bar till 2 and then go to the studio immediately and just, keep on working till like 9 a.m. or something until the next shift came in. So yeah, there we just had to take advantage of the things that we could. But really the engineering started again from when I bought that first 4-track and realized, okay, wait a minute, I can record on these 3 tracks and bounce that down onto this track, and then I can do these 2 tracks. And, even though I was doing it as a musician and doing it because I just wanted to hear my songs, I learned how to engineer at that point. And then we got a 4-track, or from the 4-track we got an 8-track. So it was just a sort of a natural evolution, and it became a thing where we couldn't afford studio time. We couldn't afford to go pay somebody premium rate, but we could kind of do it at home half-assed. Yeah. And eventually that became better than anything we could do in a studio, at least at that time, just because we could spend more time on it. Rather than just trying to go to the studio and rush and you're paying X amount of dollars per hour, we could just spend as much time as we wanted to. So, I was learning how to engineer at that time. But then when we got to Vancouver, we were able to work with some better engineers and stuff and just sort of absorb a whole different world. Like at one point we were working the midnight hour at Little Mountain Sound, which was, where Metallica, Bon Jovi, Aerosmith, I mean, you name them from that era, and they recorded there. And even though I wasn't working with a lot of those people, I wasn't working with Bob Rock, I wasn't working with all those guys, but we had work next door in the studio. Like there was a couple rooms, and then after the other guys went home, I'd sneak over there and look at how they set up their mics, look at where their gear was, the tracks on the console, all those kinds of things. So, I still consider myself from that world, from that lineage, even though really, I mean, Bob Rock probably doesn't even know, who I am, but I still consider from the Bruce Fairbairn, Bob Rock, Mike Fraser, Randy Staub, that whole sort of West Coast lineage. I mean, I think I'm a derivative of that. Yeah. And because even though if I wasn't directly working with them, I was listening to what they were doing, and those were the favorite records of mine at that time. And I was able to actually get in the room and watch and see how they did it all. And another cool thing was that Mike Plotnikoff, who was an engineer there at that time, he was our engineer for a couple projects, but he or one of the other assistants they gave us would end up falling asleep in the middle of the night because it was like 5 a.m. and who's working at that time. And so I would go into the tape locker, the tape vault, and all those bands' records were there on tape. So I'd take the AC/DC, reel down, or the Aerosmith one, or whatever I could find. Yeah. And I would go and, put it on the machine, and I'd listen to those raw tracks just to see how they record them, just to see how good the punch-ins were, just to see, what it really sounded like before it got to be mixed. So, those are the things that I would probably kick someone out of my studio for doing now if they went into my drive locker and got an old drive out. But those are the things that we do at the time.
Yeah, I know. Can you think about it now? If someone did that here, you'd be like, you'd want to kick some ass.
Well, just think about it. I could have accidentally recorded over that. And although they were probably just backups, I'm sure the label had their own version. The band probably had a version. I don't even know how it worked in those days. But I could have accidentally recorded over that. I mean, at that time, we weren't thinking about samples, so I wasn't thinking about getting the snare sample or anything like that. Like now, if someone opens my session, a lot of the keys to the kingdom are there. Yeah. So, we don't allow that here. No. But just the same, if I showed up here as an intern, I'd probably still do it.
That's great, though. I mean, that would have been so interesting to sit and go through those reels and listen to everything separated out and being able to, jump in the room where everyone's gone and look at mic placement and look what they've done on the console. And I mean, that's really cool learning.
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing. It would have been even more amazing to be in those sessions. Yeah. But again, Mike Plotnikoff, who was working with us, he was the assistant to a lot of those sessions. So he would, he'd tell us his stories. And also at that time, that high-end gear, seeing an 1176 for the first time, or an LA2, or that sort of generation of equipment, that was the first time I had seen that or worked with that. So it changed the way, as an engineer, I worked too, because of course, when you're working with a cheaper compressor, especially in those days, it definitely doesn't react the same way as the high-end gear did then. Now you can have some pretty great gear pretty affordably. Yeah. But in those days, it was either lousy or awesome, and there wasn't a lot.
Yeah, there was no in between, was there?
No.
Yeah. So when that kind of finished up with the Underground Outlaws, Where did you find yourself at that point?
Well, technically, I don't know what the other guys said, but the Underground Outlaws never really finished up.
Yeah.
So basically we didn't want to play cover gigs anymore because we thought we couldn't be taken seriously as an original band if we're just going around playing, other people's music. And we just didn't find that fun.
Yeah.
And we were able to do other things. I was able to start getting some studio work, and Corey was doing his thing and Shane was doing his. So I can't say I decided to move back to Saskatchewan, but my wife decided to move back.
Yeah. So I guess I'm coming along.
So it was kind of like, I'm going back, you can come or not. And I said, okay, I'm coming. But that was pretty instrumental in my career too. So basically, technically the Underground Outlaws were still going, but we only had to get together to create music and to tour as the Underground Outlaws, not as the Underground Outlaws playing the hits of Garth Brooks.
Yeah.
So I moved back to Saskatchewan and lived in Moose Jaw or Regina for a bunch of years. But the good news about that, besides keeping my family all in one place, was that I worked at a couple of studios there. And, I was able to work at both Talking Dog Studios, another studio called Touchwood, which was where I did most of my musical things. But it was great because the owner, Grant Hall, was a gear fiend, and so he tried to get one of everything he could, which introduced me to a lot of gear I wouldn't normally get at a small town studio.
Yeah.
Plus, he gave me a lot of time to experiment. It kind of like he gave me the keys to the studio and said, do your thing, make some money. If you're making money, pay me. But, he'd be the first one to tell you that story that, because Grant had a day job too. So he would leave for work at 9 a.m. I'd be working on the snare sound. He'd come back at 5. I'd still be working on the same snare sound. So it was great to have that flexibility of time and not be on the clock all the time. And then so when he had projects for me, from everything from a polka band to a rock band, I would work those hours for him, and he'd be making money from that. But he also allowed me to go in on the downtime and just learn and just kind of experiment and create my own projects and do my own things, which I don't think I would have had that same flexibility if I was in Vancouver or if I was in Toronto or somewhere like that.
Yeah, because you'd just be turning out projects and you wouldn't.
Yeah.
And you had, like you mentioned earlier, it's times. It's everything. You just need to get the project done lots of times. And
and there'd be 5 other guys wanting that time, the downtime too, that might be more qualified, might be further along than me. But at Grant's place there, I was, other than him, to my memory, I remember being the top dog. It was almost just kind of like me and him. A couple other guys floated in and out.
Yeah.
But it really, the studio's not being used, I'm in there.
Yeah.
So that was pretty important, I think, to my career of being able to make a drum kit 50 different ways till I find out the way that I like, versus just seeing what other people did the previous session using that or whatever the person is at that studio. And I encourage my guys here now to do their own thing and try their own ways too.
Yeah, and I think, because I remember back when I was starting recording, and I would spend. It would just be me lots of times, and there's nothing going on. And I was lucky enough to have a nice little home studio, and I'd spend hours, just hours and hours doing, just trying things.
I mean, you don't even eat.
No,
you don't even think about anything. It's like I always say I didn't age from the time I was about 12 to about 35 because I just stayed in the studio the entire time. It's like time kind of slowed down and kind of stopped in a different way because you were so into what you were doing.
Yeah, and it takes a certain personality to want to do that. Not everyone would want to sit all night long and work on a snare sound. I mean, most people would go mental.
And they're usually a lot smarter than me too. So,
yeah. I remember back in the days when I spent a long time doing, not that I don't spend a long time doing mixes now, but you would spend extra time trying new things and trying new verbs or trying new whatever you wanted to do. And I always remember having clients, they didn't want to sit in on the mix. And I'd be like, no, you probably don't want to do that. And I would purposely, the first hour, just sit there with a kick and snare and just, even though I might have had it, I would have spent extra time just so they would go crazy, and then they'd be all of a sudden, we're gonna we're going to leave you.
Yeah.
And come back and say, thank you very much.
Oh, I know that drill.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here. Even something like comping vocals, if the singer wants to stay while I comp, I'll make it painful for that first line, as painful as I possibly can, so they leave. And they do every single time. Nobody wants to hear all the bad takes of themselves singing.
No.
So they'll leave immediately, and they'll call them when I'm done, and it's a lot better life.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. That's the big one, comping vocals, to have the singer there. It's just
that sends you down the rabbit hole real quick, and
Yeah.
where nothing gets done because they're listening to the wrong things.
Yeah, totally. So obviously spending a bunch of time in Regina and Saskatchewan recording in the studio. So what was the next step after that point?
Okay, so after that, my brother got his big gig.
Yeah.
And so basically working for his boss was kind of the next thing that I did. So
So tell that story. How did that all come about?
I mean, you'd have to get it more exact from Corey, but what I understand happened was, so remember when Corey got the fiddle playing job with Shania, I also auditioned for the drumming gig.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't get the drumming gig.
Yeah.
And I was pretty crushed at that time, but of course you look back on life and it all made sense. I mean, I was destined to be more a studio guy, which is what I wanted to do anyways.
Yeah.
I mean, I always wanted to do that more than anything else. So, but I'm sitting in Regina while my brother's traveling the world.
Yeah.
But as it turns out, Mutt was living in Switzerland, and Mutt Lange, the producer on those albums, was living in Switzerland, and he wasn't happy with one of the guys that he had as a programmer / engineer.
Yeah.
And they remembered, so Corey and Shania were sitting down at lunch one time. This is the way I've heard it, and she said, Mutt's looking for a new guy. Doesn't your brother do that? And because on my resume to be a drummer, I had all my studio experience on it. Like I thought that would really sell me as a drummer. And Corey said, yeah. And she said, well, give me his number so I can pass it on. And Corey said, cool. So she did. And then Corey immediately sends me a note saying, hey, probably nothing's going to come of this, but just in case, be ready for it. And sure enough, I mean, eventually Mutt called and we had a chat on the phone for about an hour at 4 a.m. I think my son answered, and I was in bed. But like a lot of people that can't understand time codes, or not time
zones,
time zones. That Mutt calls me at 4 a.m. and I pick up and we had a good little chat. And then he didn't call me again. And then a couple weeks later, I was doing a drum session. He called me in the middle of it, and of course, I took that call.
So what was that first conversation like? What was the conversation about?
The first conversation was, I think, especially knowing what I know now, is just him just getting to know me as a personality and just what I thought. I mean, it wasn't really an interview, a work interview, as much as just a conversation.
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are you working on? What kind of music you like? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And in fact, honestly, I can't even remember it that much. He might actually have a better recollection than me, although I'm sure it was a lot more eventful for me than him.
Yeah.
But I can't remember, other than just shivering, basically naked in my living room, talking to him at 4 a.m. on October night, and me just trying not to embarrass myself in any way and trying to act like I knew what I was doing and that I was the right guy.
Yeah.
I was a big fan of his whole entire history. He was my number one favorite producer. So it's like I knew what he needed. I knew. I knew his background, and I knew a little bit of what he'd be looking for in a guy too. So I just tried to represent that as good as I could. Yeah. Hoping he'd call me back.
It worked.
It did. It worked. He called me back, and then he talked to me for a little bit again, and then asked me if I wanted to come to Switzerland for a face-to-face. And so I, let me check my schedule, counted to 5 and said, oh, yeah, sure, it looks good. Like I'm not going to go, and like I'm not going to blow everything else, every other job I have in order to take that shot.
Yeah.
So then I went there to Switzerland, and lucky for me, the minute I showed up, they were having a technical problem.
Oh, yeah.
and it was a time code problem of syncing up the Pro Tools rig to the 3348 Dash, which is a Sony digital machine that used tape.
Yep.
And so Mutt at that point liked to record vocals on tape still. He did everything else on computers, but liked to record the vocals on tape because he could work it himself and he had a system down. And so he just wasn't completely convinced it was always truly in sync.
Yeah.
And so lucky for me, because I had done, again, some video work and some movie work and TV show work and had a lot of time to kill, where I was working before, I understood all that. And so I very quickly fixed this problem and proved it to him that it was completely in sync. And at that point, he kind of sent the other guy home because he had only introduced me as his friend, his Canadian friend who's coming to visit. I don't think he wanted to let out of the bag yet that the other guy was going to be let go. So he sent the other guy home, and then I worked the controls at that point. I basically engineered and programmed for him, and it was just some keyboard stuff we were doing. So I was basically just moving MIDI notes around for him. Yeah. And every now and then I had to remind myself to breathe, because it was literally like I'd be running out of breath trying to do a good job. He'd be sitting behind me. I'd be at the controls and change that one to this and that one to this and, do this, da-da-da. And he'd sing a line and I'd try to do it right. And all of a sudden it's like, I got to breathe, because I'm just so intent on doing a good job. I was so nervous. So that's kind of what it started. But then he sent me home. So I was there for a couple of days. He said I was already scheduled to leave the next morning, and we'd be working from 10 a.m. till 4 a.m. It was like trial by fire. Yeah. Although that was just the way that he worked. Period. Yeah. But at 4 a.m., or whenever he quit for the night, had been a little bit early, like at midnight or something. And he said, "Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow." I said, "I'm leaving tomorrow." I said, "Yeah, I'll be up at 6 a.m. to say bye because I had to catch a train." And I said, "Okay, great." 6 a.m. comes. He's not there to greet me, not there to say goodbye. And, I thought, oh, geez, I blew it. Yeah. But, I went home. I still felt good. Like I did as good a job as I could. It wasn't like it went bad and I embarrassed myself or anything. But I went home and eventually called me again and said, sorry, I wasn't up there, to say goodbye to you. But, I had fun with you, blah, blah, blah. I still want to give my guy, a few chances. So we'll see how it goes. And I'll let you know. Yeah. And then probably about a month after that, then he called and said, "Do you want to come work for real?" I go, "Yeah."
So that would have been, even though, a chance of a lifetime there, it probably still, that's a big move, big change.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not like it happened all at once in the sense that my whole family didn't move there. It was very much, and he wanted to kind of expand. He was way behind, and he thought if he got a couple good qualified guys there that he could work faster. Yeah. So both my brother and I, so he scheduled Corey and I to go there and kind of help him out. And at that point, I was more studio guy. Corey was more guitar player guy. So I had to get him caught up on the technology side of it. Yeah. So he came to Regina for I don't know how many weeks, and we had about a month to when Mutt wanted us to move there. Yeah, or not move there, but go there to work. Yeah. And so I just I gave Corey a crash course, and he helped me out with certain things, and then we were ready to go. And I could be wrong, but I still think it was like January 7th. Still to me seems like the date. Yeah. Of when we got there, and then we stayed there for about 30 days, I think. Nonstop, 10 a.m. till 4 a.m. every day.
So what were you working on at that? Was that Shania's project or was it another project?
No, the first thing I did was a Britney Spears song. Yeah. So that was the job where he had to let the other guy go, and so he's behind on that. And so basically we started on that project. Yeah. Corey simultaneously was doing a Christmas record with him that I'm not sure that ever saw the light of day, but he was just starting it. So he'd kind of sit with Corey in one room for a little while and get Corey going, and he'd come with me on the Britney thing, and he'd just keep working with me on that. Yeah. So that was the first project that I had worked on with him, which was pretty fun. So
it's actually a project where you weren't stealing a reel from the room.
No, I wasn't. But it was legitimate work from start until go. The reason why I'm stalling is because someone tried to steal that from me at a later point in time. But that's a whole other story.
Oh yeah. So obviously, probably like you mentioned, long days.
Exceptionally long days. Like nobody has worked, but I was already working those because I'd be working like 9 until 6 at the music studio, and then I'd be working the film studio from 7 till midnight, kind of thing, just to to pay the mortgage. And
so you're used to those hours.
Yeah, for me it wasn't very tough. For other people, it was a little tougher for Corey, I think. But it doesn't take a person long to kind of have their body clock adjust.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you want to do it as bad as we wanted to do it, I mean, I just didn't think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I was drained. I mean, I thought, wow, I've been here for 28 days in Switzerland and I haven't even left this building.
Yeah. Because
our accommodations were in the studio too.
Yeah.
And there's a big compound. So it's like, we're not driving the studio. We're not, occasionally we go for lunch somewhere and Mutt was always very gracious and always took us out everywhere, like to eat.
Yeah.
But a lot of times he had the food brought in. But I realized I haven't even seen the lake, and I can see it when I go out of the studio, but like I haven't been there. So one time at lunch, Corey and I just walked all the way down the path, and 50 minutes we were there, and then just walked back, and that was my big Swiss kind of experience for that first month.
Yeah.
So it was heavy days. Just like anything, you have to prove yourself. And I always thought that was maybe his way of testing me, just to see if I could kind of cope.
Yeah, I think you learn, like anything, especially in the studio, when you surround yourself with people who are more experienced or better than you, it really makes you a better person. I mean, you rise to the occasion. You hopefully rise to the occasion.
You rise or you don't.
Yeah.
You sink or you swim.
Yeah.
And I remember at that time we'd be working and I'd have to go to the bathroom. That was almost my only kind of break.
Yeah.
Because it's not like we were taking breaks.
Yeah.
Other than TV breaks if you found a good show on. But when I went to the bathroom, I would take a manual.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's so many synthesizers I was never used, so much stuff I needed to learn at that point. I mean, he had one of everything and state of the art of everything, so I was trying to get really caught up. So it's like my bathroom break wasn't even a break. It was like, what can I randomly learn in the 2 to 5 minutes I was sitting there? And then if I found something interesting, I bookmarked the page and I get to it later on or something.
Yeah.
But then by the end of the night, you're so drained that all you can do is go to sleep in order to wake up again.
Well, you'd be just mentally drained.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It was a total mental drain. But, in a sense, it was almost like an army mentality. I always kind of thought, too, that he probably didn't really, this wasn't an intentional thing that he did, but I always thought that was his way of breaking me down and building me back up. It's like, take away sleep, sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
And completely, I mean, I wanted to learn as much as I could. So it was like I was there to learn.
Yeah.
So, and you combine that with sleep deprivation, and anything I was learning was my new truth at that point. It wasn't up for debate until later on in life, after I left probably for a decade, and go, maybe that's not the best way of doing things. But generally it was.
Yeah.
I did learn a lot, and I did really respect him, and still do.
What do you think you learned was the biggest thing you learned in that first full month of working there?
I would say the biggest thing I learned is I was surprised at how hard he worked, because he's Mutt Lange. By that time, he had his projects had already probably sold 300 million units at that time or something. So he doesn't have to do that anymore, and he's still doing it. Yeah. And so that combined with, I thought there would be more distinct keys to that kingdom, because all this stuff felt so good. Like when you listen to right from Back in Black, on, everything that he does feels incredibly good. Like just the vibe of it, the groove of it. It's always flawless.
Yeah.
So I thought he might have a formula, like always lay the snare drum back 10 milliseconds at so-and-so tempo, or like I thought it would be more scientific than it was. And it was really just the same way as anybody does it, other than he had more stamina. So it's like you just keep going till you get it right, till it sounds right. And you keep trying things and you keep, So it would be the simplest of bass lines that I would be programming with him. And it would just be like the AC/DC style of bass, do-do-do-do-do-do, that eighth note kind of thing with 4 chords. It's not rocket science. He's done it a million times at that point in time in life. And we'd still sit there all day and move notes around and push some and delay some, and until we were out of time, and then we wake up the next day and start over again because that didn't feel right the next day when we got in.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really expecting sort of at that point in time he's still trying. It's still just a matter of trying. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
And then moving on.
So in those moments where you're making those subtle changes, and obviously someone of his caliber's got in-depth hearing and has this vision and whatever. So do you feel at that point you were hearing those changes and they were all making sense to you, or when you finally got there, you were like, wow, that makes sense, or is it just you were just working and getting it done? Or
I would be lying to you if I could hear lots of things that he heard.
Yeah.
I was trying to learn that. In fact, I was no different then than I was when I was 21 or that I am now. It's like I'm thinking in my mind, this is getting worse, not better. Or I don't know where he's going here. This isn't right.
Yeah.
But in the end, it always was right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would even doubt sometimes if he could hear the rhythmical things that we were doing, because we so subtly changed notes, and tested him a couple of times, and he passed every time. I mean, yeah, he was just on a different plane. As far as musically, as far as rhythmically, because he had put so many years into doing that. Most of us don't put that much time. And even as drummers, I don't think drummers always some do, but not every drummer always understands how exact or how playing behind the beat, playing in front, all those kind of sort of simple issues are actually quite a bit different than what they would actually think of it.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful to have that time with him to kind of experiment with all these things and really kind of organize it in my mind, to the point where I had to test MIDI, realizing that the problem was that the MIDI was shifting and swaying around.
Exactly.
And then I had to figure out that MIDI was serial, meaning that if I programmed four notes in a chord, they're not all playing at the same time.
Yeah.
They're actually playing slightly one after each other.
Yeah.
And in a random order, it seemed too. I mean, I don't want to get on the technical side here because because it's not what this is about. But I can't remember what the question was about, other than I couldn't hear what he heard. No, I couldn't. And I would keep trying, and I would, in fact, sometimes I just don't hear what you're telling me. I don't hear why that's wrong.
Yeah.
And he would just keep saying it's wrong. And so I'd have to figure it out, or he'd tell me. He'd usually know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just a whole different, higher level than before or since, And people can't necessarily take that kind of time anymore to make records, and many times it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Particularly in country, it's just about a global feel, about a general feel of a band playing. It's not about everything being gone over with a fine-tooth comb, and I think that that's okay and that's cool. I mean, some of the music I like the most sounds out of time and out of tune, but it's hitting me in the right way. And that's another skill to learn too, is when is that hitting you? When is that mayhem a good thing and not a bad thing?
Yeah.
And it's easy for someone to point to a song and say, that's so out of tune and out of time, and that works, so I can play out of tune and out of time now too. Well, no, you can't. That worked because it worked. Yeah. And that's a random working almost. And that's the thing that I fought against my whole life, is I like to understand. I like to compartmentalize. I like to figure out why it's working and why it doesn't work. And with Mutt's kind of production, you can kind of figure that out eventually, and with mine too. But with, it's more mysterious to me when something like a Steve Earle track is so out of tune, but I love it still as much as I do. Yeah. Why does that work that way? I mean, I can't always figure out that. That's more mysterious to me than knowing when something is purely in tune or out of tune, in time, out of time. Let's shift that back a little bit. That sounds better. I mean, I can do all that. I think it's sometimes more difficult to randomly know when something's right, because then, and again, and that's different kind of producer, because you can only judge by your own judgment, by what you feel. Yeah. And you may feel something completely different. I mean, many times with every band I work with, I'm kind of thinking differently than they are. But eventually I can prove to them why I'm right. Yeah. But if you can't prove you're right, that it's just completely a matter of opinion. And everybody hears music a different way, and that's what makes it great, just like any art, if it's painting or whatever. I mean, everybody's going to look at something or listen to something a different way. And if you're lucky, you have the ear that mainstream, or at least you can understand what the majority of regular people listen to and how they listen to it. And that's what makes you valuable to bands and artists and record companies, is because your judgment is one that will resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Versus just getting into a room with a bunch of drummers and go, that's the best drumming track, or get into a room with a bunch of guitar players and that guy played that Steely Dan solo better than anybody else ever did.
Yeah.
That's not being valuable to a band as far as I'm concerned. Because I want my bands to have careers and lengthy careers and have lives, and you can't always have a life in music if you're just doing what you want to do. If you're not, or rather, you can do what you want to do, but as long as you're resonating with enough people who appreciate it.
Yeah, because I think a lot of artists, a lot of musicians worry too much about what the other musicians are going to think about what they're doing, instead of worrying about what the audience who's going to buy the project will think of it.
Well, and that is that, you asked me what I learned from Mutt. That was the number one thing I learned from him too, was that, he didn't consider himself, let's call it, part of the cool kids club.
Yeah.
And he never wanted to be in the cool kids club. He wanted to sell records. He wanted his music to reach as many people as it could.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean being extra cool with your vintage reverb or your vintage guitar that nobody else likes the sound of. I mean, it's a whole different thought process. But just the same, I still admire the other guys that just want to do what they want to do for the sake of art.
Yeah.
Because that's really cool. Yeah, just go push those boundaries too, because there's a need for that too, because that will influence more commercial music at some point too. Yeah. So I don't look at it as anything as being better, good, less good, or not. I just enjoy making commercial music so I can fix my car when I need to, and I can have a pool in my backyard. But I don't look at it as being more valuable or important than some guy sitting in his room pushing the boundaries of how fast he can play one string.
Yeah.
In a solo. I mean, that's still really cool to me as a musician too, and as an executionist, it's still really interesting. But it's no more interesting to me in a sense than finding a good song that 300 million people stream and go, why did they like that song? I mean, that, and in a sense, that's more meaningful. I mean, I think that music can be meaningful in people's lives more so. And a lot of it is related to a lyric or related to that feeling that they get. Mm-hmm. But that, I guess maybe the way to quantify it is that if 10 people are touched by a song or 1,000 people are touched by a song, that doesn't mean that either song is better or worse, but I'd rather be touching 1,000 people than the 10.
Yeah.
Because I think that's just more meaningful for me as a person.
Yeah, exactly.
Now that everybody's fallen asleep.
No, that was great. I loved it. So moving on, you finished those 30 days. Did you go back home after that?
Yeah. So basically the way that it worked in those days is that we would go there for around a month, and then we go home he flies home for a week, and then we go back for a month and flies home for a week and back and forth until finally about 6 months went by, and then he realized he couldn't work double duties. Even like myself too, I'm the same way now. He couldn't have his mind in two different rooms. Yeah. So he decided that he just wanted one guy. And of course I was a lot further ahead engineer wise and and programming than Corey was. So he just said, look, I want you to come here full time. I'll move your family here. Just tell me what you need. So I went home and talked to Kemne, and we decided that we'd go live in Switzerland.
Why not? It's kind of like Moose Jaw.
Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, that was really exciting. Mm-hmm. An exciting time for the family too.
I bet.
So yeah.
Obviously, that probably wasn't that difficult of a decision to some degree. It's an exciting new place to go to, and family was all on board, and away you went.
Yeah, they had no idea what was coming.
Yeah,
but it sounded fun at the time, and it was. I don't think any of us would look back at that time as being anything other than an awesome time.
Yeah,
but a lot of learning too, because you're in a foreign country, foreign language. Yeah, everything's different. From a gas station pump to whatever. I mean, you're constantly learning, your mind's constantly moving, particularly for the kids, because all of a sudden they're going to school in a foreign language too. So,
yeah, that would be a big shock for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I dropped Chloe. She's, I think, in third grade at the time. I dropped her off at French school. Basically, literally just dropped her off. And luckily her teacher was English too, so he could kind of communicate, but probably only for the first week, and after that everything's in French, and she's on the playground with kids in French. And there was some English speaking kids, but very little, so it's like it's basically the same thing, trial by fire, sink or swim. Yeah
That's cool. So how long did you spend there in Switzerland then?
Well, my total time there was, I guess, a little over 3 years. Something like that, if I'm adding in my head right. Even though I still worked for him a little bit after that, because after that we moved to LA. Yeah. And but then I still went back and forth doing some work for him, some projects for him, and different things. So I kind of worked for him from day one, probably about four years, I think, which seems honestly like 40. Yeah. But that was 4 years of college. Yeah. That's how I put
college you can go to.
4 years of college, and you have credits at the end, and you have a bit of cash too. So it worked out good. You don't owe money.
Yeah. So what main projects were we working on over those 4 years?
We did a bunch of Shania things, including the album Up and the Greatest Hits. And then we did a few songs by the band The Corrs.
Oh, yeah. Love that group.
Yeah, I loved working with them, too. We did a Britney Spears track, did a Celine Dion track, some Bryan Adams movie stuff. Michael Bolton came to sing a track.
Oh, yeah.
That was fun.
Good.
I guess those were the things off the top of my head that I did with him, as well as we did some DVDs and different things like that, which was actually quite a lot of work. Yeah. Because you're trying to make that sound as good as you possibly can.
So were you getting more into engineering at that point too, or?
You know what? I was a pretty solid engineer before I kind of went there working for him. So I would say the skills I was acquiring were probably more related to programming. Yeah. Meaning synths and anything digital, and as well as obviously a big education on musical arrangement and writing, even though that wasn't what I was serving him for. I was just an engineer and programmer. Yeah. But the things that I was really learning the most were the things that are almost impossible to teach unless you go through a process like that. Yeah. With him, where I could just see from 1 minute to the next. I remember thinking, this is the best track I could ever do, and then him taking out my favorite parts, going, why is he taking those parts? That's the best part of this whole song. That guitar tone is the best guitar tone we've ever got. And then realizing it later when the vocal fits in there and they get slotted in, okay, I get it now. So you would ask me, could I understand it? And the answer is no. Going back to that question, I think the best way I can put it is if anybody's ever seen that Kung Fu series where David Carradine is Quan Chain Kane, which is also where my son Kane got his name from. Oh, cool. It was kind of that grasshopper moment where where you think back and you go, oh, yeah, I understand why the master said that at that point in time. I didn't understand it then, but I understand it 10 years later, right? So, and so by doing all those projects, I got to kind of witness the master at work, and just, he really is one, so.
Yeah. So moved on to LA was your next stop.
So I was able to get a company to sponsor me into America so I could come here legally. Yeah. And so we stayed in Vancouver just for 3 months while I was waiting for my visas and everything to go through. Yeah. And eventually got through. And I went to LA, and at that time they had Pro Tools operator agents. Let's call them. Yeah. Because it was still new enough there on a bigger level that if you had any skills, someone would hire the Pro Tools guy. Yeah. So that was the easiest thing for me to kind of get into, and with my credits, they figure if I worked for Mutt, I'd probably be pretty good. Yeah. So nobody was hiring me as really. I mean, I got a couple engineering gigs, but immediately I wasn't a producer. I had no credits. So, and it was just an easy thing for me to be in the end kind of the fix it, mix it guy. Yeah. The company that sponsored me is a company called Audio One, who David Frangione and his wife Jenny owned that company at that time. And as part of my deal, his company was big enough to sponsor me into the country, but I had to produce some music for his wife. Oh, okay. Because she was a singer. So Jenna Dre was her name. And so for me, it was the best of everything, because not only did I get into the country legally, but I also had another job on top of it all, too. So it became a great sort of partnership for a while. And I think I agreed to 7 songs with her, and in the end, we did like a whole pile of songs over time.
Yeah,
and as well as that led to another great moment in my life too, where Audio One built studios too. So they built Ozzy's studio in LA. And this is really when my life changed from an engineer to producer in a certain sense, is that they built Ozzy's studio. Ozzy didn't like the drum room, or I shouldn't say he didn't like it. He thought it was pretty small to be a big sounding room. How the drum was going to sound big, because it was in his house. So they didn't really have a lot of space. So David knew I was a drummer, and he trusted me, and he said, can you come over here and just record some drums for Ozzy so he can hear the room. There's a Yamaha custom kit here. Just, come over, set it up, mic it up, and he's going to come down and listen.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that I almost didn't do it. I think I was watching Curb Your Enthusiasm or something at the time. And because a lot of these things just end up being a whole lot of work.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee Ozzy's going to come down. And even after that, if I'm the guy that set up the drums, is there any guarantee he's going to want to work with me? He's going to go to his guys that are much bigger than me. And so maybe I was already a little bitter about it all. And Curb Your Enthusiasm was really good.
Yeah.
No, and I think there's a couple things where he called me one time and then that got canceled. I can't remember it all exactly, other than I remember thinking, I guess I'll just go do it. So I went there to do it, and sure enough, I put a whole lot of work into it. And his assistant had told me, Ozzy really likes the In the Air Tonight drum, so with big gated room verb and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of made it sound like that as best as I could with double-headed toms and not single-headed toms. And then they called Ozzy down, and he only probably came down for 10 minutes, very limited chit-chat. Listened to what I'd done, thought it was good, and then he left. And it was as simple as that. And then I packed up and left. So it was for me, it was probably turning into what I thought it would turn into, which was just a favor for a friend. But I got to meet Ozzy, so that was cool, because I was always a huge fan. Yeah. But what was better than that is I had to interface with all his support people and his assistant and different people around the house there. So we had chatted the whole day, so they liked me, and we got on really good. So they remembered me more than Ozzy did. I don't think if he saw me the next day, if he would remember who I was. Yeah. But they liked me enough to, when the studio was finished being built, they called me to be the manager of his studio. Yeah. And I said, you mean, because he was going to have different producers coming in and out, and he needed a technical guy to be around all the time to make sure everything worked. Yeah. I said, so you mean like a general assistant patching other engineers, patch cables, and sending gear back to be fixed and cleaning up after everybody's gone? And they said, yeah. And I said, no. Yeah. I'm not interested in that, because that I want to make records. Yeah. I'm here to make records. I can do that anywhere. So thanks for calling. But I'm going to have to turn that down. But if you're ever interested in me helping make a record, give me a call. Yeah. And so, and I should say, before they offered me the manager job, actually, if I remember, I did go in there to do a couple of sort of general assisting type things for someone who was working with Callie Osbourne and her sister. And so I've been around there a couple more times. They kind of got to know me more, which is why they offered me sort of the manager job. But I said, you know what? I just want to make records. I don't want to be the backroom technical support guy. So call me if you ever need anything. And I thought they'd never call me ever again, because usually if you turn people down on a job, they just never call. Yeah. But sure enough, once Ozzy and Zach started recording there, they realized that they could make a record at his own studio. And so at that time, they had the manager who took the job, basically instead of me, who happened to be a good friend of mine that worked for Audio One too. So he's the main guy. But, even he would say he didn't have the skills that I had. And so what had happened was he had to take a week off to go back to Florida to do some job, and they needed a guy to fill in. And they called me. Oh, yeah. So I'm filling in, and for a week, and it was awesome. And it was me working with Ozzy and Zach for real for the first time. It was very exciting. I kept thinking, wait a minute, I'm going to walk down there and one day they're going to realize they're Ozzy and Zach and I'm just Kevin Churko. Who the hell am I? But they never sent me home. So after that week, I went back to life, and my buddy Zach Fagan came back to kind of continue on, and then they decided that they wanted to make a record there, and just thought maybe I could assist in other ways than what Zach could. So then, and you know, Zach and I are still really good friends. Yeah, I feel bad telling this story because he's such a brilliant guy. Yeah. But it just ended up that I got the call to go back there as an engineer only. Yeah. And so I was there probably for, you know, a good long time after that, just recording Zach and the guys playing and Ozzy singing, and that turned into producing it and writing with them. And that kind of is really the monumental sort of period or the thing. I mean, Mutt was awesome for the knowledge and for the skills, but that actually put me on the map for other people to be hiring me as producer or mixer or engineer. Yeah. You know, so.
Yeah, it's definitely you know, you have to make that change too.
And the irony of the whole thing, and for people listening who are aspiring to do what I do, just consider that probably nobody else in LA would be hiring me to do that. And it took the top metal guy to hire me, which is totally unreal that I would be given that shot when, you know, probably lots of lower level bands and A&R people would never have even given me a shot or a chance. Yeah. So just because you don't get a chance at a low level doesn't mean you don't get the big call. Yeah. You know, and I always used to joke with Kemne is that, you know, my phone would ring when it came to Vegas, and, you know, I was a lot of the times I needed work. So it's like, is this going to be the big call? It never was the big call, but that call can technically come at any time. I mean, I've had that call a couple of times now. So.
Yeah, and a lot of it, you know, it's like anything. It's time and place and you know, relations. You know, it all.
Well, you know what? I think that's the other thing that I'd like to reiterate as much as I could is that the relationship thing is exceptionally important. And mostly I've been good at that with a few exceptions, but it's like I told you about Grant Hall owning that studio where I used to work at. Well, now he also has a room here at my studio here now. So after all these years, it's come full circle where, you know, he's got a bunch of gear in a room and we kind of pool our gear, and he books it for a couple days each month and comes in. And so he's still a part of my life after all these years. And so, and that's been really awesome for us both. But also the whole, Ozzy and Zach thing, I mean, that came about because of my relationship with Audio One, with the company who sponsored me, because again, I was basically a decent dude and did what I said I'd do, and that relationship still, even Zach Fagan, the assistant, or not the assistant, but the engineer I told you that I kind of replaced, he eventually wired the studio I built here in town. So like that relationship could have gone horrible, where he was bitter at me, or I might have handled it the wrong way. But instead, we became better friends, and I eventually was able to employ him. And I tried to employ him at my studio here too. It really didn't work out the way that we had both planned as far as timeline went. So the long-term relationships are really important. Just never try to burn a bridge. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, because you just never know, right? It's
look at you and me here.
Yeah,
I mean, how many years ago did we meet?
Yeah, a long, long time.
Yeah, we were both much younger men.
Yes, we were. So eventually, you end up moving here to Las Vegas. What made you make the jump here to Vegas?
Well, I actually moved here before I got the Ozzy gig. So basically, before I got that job, I was doing a lot of work at home in LA of a house that I rented. Yeah, it was like, I think about 1,800 square feet or something like that. So there's one room I could kind of set aside as my room. It was very small. And I became a little bit of a fix-it, mix-it kind of guy for different people. So they just send me drives. I'd time the drums or tune the vocal, whatever they needed me to do, and send it back. Yeah. I had a couple bands that I got production gigs with that would show up, and I'd make records with them. But they didn't care if I was living in LA or anywhere else. So basically, once again, Kemne wanted to have a real house that we bought. And I was doing okay financially. I mean, I wasn't making a lot of money, but enough to buy a house. Yeah. So LA was just crazy expensive at that time. It was like $800,000 for like a starter home that didn't even give me like a place for a studio. Yeah. or in the bad part of town. So we ended up going to Vegas on a vacation, just a weekend thing, and said, you know what? It's not too bad here. Let's drive around. We kind of drove into the suburbs a little bit more. And the price of a house was half as much with a lot more square footage. And we eventually found a house where I had an independent room with its own air conditioning system and all that. So it wasn't going to be that much trouble for the rest of the house. And with the hot gear and all that, I could cool it down right. And, you know, if people are just sending me drives anyways, why can't we live here?
Yeah.
And the reality was we could. So I did. And we moved there and had lots of moments of panic. What did I do?
Yeah.
Who goes to Vegas to become, you know, an engineer producer? The answer was nobody, except me.
Yeah.
But it worked out again real well because instead of being, because by moving to Vegas, I kind of became that Vegas guy.
Yeah.
Instead of staying in LA and just being another guy.
Yeah.
Because there's so many people there, it's hard to make an identity. And you know, I just had a much better life here. You know, less traffic, more freedom, less cost of living, which means that your quality of living goes up. And then right after, like a few months after living here, I got the Ozzy call, and I never gave away my LA cell phone, so they assumed I lived in town.
Okay. Yeah.
Had they not assumed I lived in town, I probably wouldn't have gotten that call.
Yeah.
But I would just drive back and forth every time they needed me for weeks.
Yeah.
Until finally one Friday night, Zach wanted to like record till 4 a.m. and I was supposed to drive home that night, and it's like a 4-hour drive. And I think I must have let it slip. Oh, it's going to be a long drive back to Vegas. Vegas? You live in Vegas? I said, yeah, I've lived there the whole time. What? You should have told us. So we wrapped it for the night. But by then, I think by then I already knew I was in the club.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to prove that I was valuable. And at that time, I had proved I would show up on time. I'm always there, working harder than anybody else is. So it kind of became not a problem.
Yeah.
And they didn't care where I lived at that point. But had they known I didn't live in town, I probably never would have gotten that call. Because you forward think problems. Even now with me too, I forward think problems. If there's a red flag, you know, people like myself tend to start moving away from it because you just don't need problems.
Yeah. You know, it's funny how you now as a studio owner here, and you've got a bunch of people working for you, and you know, those are things that now you recognize that you wouldn't have dealt with, but sometimes it makes you think that, well, am I missing out on somebody or missing out on something because now I'm thinking as a, you know, the studio owner and things that you got in for because of certain reason. Now you have to be the guy that cuts things off and this sort of, you know,
yeah.
But then it makes you think, you know, well, that's the way I got in, but
yeah,
makes you think differently.
Yeah, you know, I definitely have a different perspective on everything.
Yeah.
Because now I have a 13,000 square foot building with 18 air conditioners. Even though like my daughter runs it all, and I don't have to do a lot, it's still a lot to think about.
Oh yeah.
And that also, you know, that combined with the different level that I'm producer at now, you know, with different projects and dealing with a different level of industry person that I do now. Now I realize why some people above me do the things that they do.
Yeah.
So I actually tend to be more forgiving and accepting of other people now, because I remember as a young kid being angry about certain things because I couldn't understand why. But now I understand why. So, okay, I get it. So now when I run into a situation where I don't quite understand what somebody's all about, I just say there's probably things I don't know. I'm not him. I don't know what they have to think about. Particularly, you know, people further up, let's call it the musical industry food chain.
Yeah.
Is that they all have their own problems, their own worries. If they don't call me back, I don't take it personally, because there's lots of people I don't call back now because you just don't have time in your day to give everybody attention that needs it, or that wants it or asks for it. So you know, but the people that continuously call me back, or continuously call me, I tend to take more seriously, because obviously they want it more. Yeah. And I don't purposely do that. You know, I think I responded right away to your podcast request, although yeah, it might have been a couple days later because it might have come in on a weekend or something like that.
Yeah, no, you did.
But let's say, but you were somebody I knew. I go, oh yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody I didn't know, I might not have responded to it. I hate to say.
Oh yeah, I totally understand.
But in which case, it shouldn't. You know, if you hit me up a second time, that same guy, I might have looked twice and then clicked on the link and said, oh, it's a cool podcast. Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah. So it's not always personal. And so now I understand when people deal with me, presidents of labels and big management companies and stuff, if I want to work with one of their bands and they don't call me back, it's really nothing personal. It's just whatever ever happens. That on that day was a bad day. He had a fight with his wife. He got lost in his email chain that he had. I mean, who knows? So I tend to give more people a little bit more of a pass, these days, just because I have to deal with a different level of stress and relationships now.
Yeah,
too.
Exactly. Last time I checked out your studio, you were in a different location.
Right.
You were just kind of on the edge of the strip, basically, weren't you?
Yeah.
And what made you make that decision to go there? You just needed to find a...
Well, the reason why I built the studio there is because I had a good friend who owned the building.
Yeah.
And they ran the Italian restaurant there and stuff. And so he just made me a great deal. Said, you need to be out of your house, and why don't you come here, and then we can collaborate, and we can, pool our gear, and, it's basically helped us both out to do it there. And then he gave me affordable rent.
Yeah.
And because he knew I was going to come and spend, thousands and thousands of dollars building a proper studio in his building, which now, since I left there, he actually runs that place now. So it ended up being great for us both. But I just wanted basically a commercial place where it wasn't my home.
Yeah.
But that was still really great, and that I could still do quality work at. And that was kind of the best place, and it was a wonderful, vibey place for a long time, and I miss it in many ways now. The smallness of it, in a sense, and it was a very special place. I did a lot of great albums there.
Yeah, I really. You're gracious enough. When a few years ago, I remember I gave you a call. Hey, I'm in town. He said, come see the studio, and Corey was in town, and checked it out. It was I really liked it in there. It's very cozy and. Had a really cool vibe.
Yeah, I miss it. I mean, it's cozy here too, but when you're on a commercial place, you have to treat it a little bit differently. It's like I can have all my cool ambient, vibey things out, like, some decorations, like maybe some skulls, a Kiss poster, different things that I put up.
Yeah.
And then if Carlos Santana's coming in the next day, you got to take all that stuff down because that's not his vibe.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a little different level. That I miss the proprietariness of having my own personal studio where I didn't have to satisfy anybody other than me.
Yeah.
Now, the Backstreet Boys are coming in around some time. It's got to be appropriate for them. So, yeah, I really miss that place. Even though, I mean, obviously here the place is so much bigger, and I got 4 big studios and awesome gear and vintage gear, microphone collection like I thought I'd never have.
Yeah.
So those are all wonderful new things. It's just, some old guy looking back on the old times.
Yeah. No, there's those places and times in your life that, it's you kind of miss, and always going forward is great, but there's sometimes there's a certain place that you always enjoy and like going to. So how did this whole place here at the Hideout come about?
Right. So while we're working at my old studio, and Kane or Chloe, my daughter, used to run that place too, but there's just so little to actually do.
Yeah.
And Kane had a room there too. So my son and I both had our own little rooms, and his room was quite a bit smaller than mine, and he was rising in the ranks, and he just needed more space in a control room. We wanted to have a dedicated drum room, as well as we were now taking on, both of us were doing different projects, so we would have like 2 bands there at the same time. Yeah. And it just wasn't big enough. It was really just, the only reason why we moved was just a matter of we needed space, and we needed, we just needed more room, as simple as that. And we were both still hoping to get bigger and better, and we just didn't feel we could do it there without renting even more space. And then I'm investing money into someone else's building. Yeah. And you never really get that money back when you're renting. Yeah. So, so I went to Plan B, which was, excuse me, just got a frog in my throat. Which was, I bought a new property. I bought a house. Yeah. And it had an acre and a half of land. So I was going to build in this backyard, my dream studio, and it was still only going to be a small private studio for Kane and me.
Yeah.
But it would be a lot, twice as big as what I had. And Kane would have a full size control room. I'd have a full size control room. We'd share a drum room in the middle, playing room, and have a couple of ISO booths. And I was quite a few $1,000s into building it with architects and planning. I even had some people come out and do soil samples, and they were drilling into my land, and we were literally ready to press the go button on that. And then this studio that I bought sent me an email, said, "We're ready to sell. Are you interested in?" And the reason why they sent that is because for the previous 5 years, I remember telling Kane one time when I rented this place that I'm going to get this place for a dime on the dollar one day. Just wait. Mm-hmm. And it took me 5 years, but every year I would send these guys a note saying, can I either completely lease out the building or can I buy it? Even though I had no money. Yeah. I had no money to do either one. And occasionally say, yeah, you can lease it out, but they give me such a high number that it didn't even make sense. So I said, well, that's too high, but keep me in mind. And they kept saying no, but I'd see the ownership change from 4 co-owners to 3 co-owners to 2 co-owners. I knew I was getting closer. Yeah. And when one guy was left, then eventually that guy wanted to kind of get out of it too. I mean, the gentleman who really owned it is quite wealthy, and so he was kind of retiring, and his son was running his studio, and he wanted to take more of his other father's businesses, the ones that really made money, not the recording studio that didn't make any cash. So they were just anxious to leave, and I don't think they needed to make a whole bunch of money from it, and I don't think they cared. It was for that kind of level of person has that much money, like Cayman Islands money. They just were happy to basically get something decent for us, throw us the keys and leave. Yeah. And they didn't want to have a whole bunch of people coming in and doing studies, and it's a hassle to sell a place of this size, because if you're not selling it to a studio guy, they're going to rip it apart, in which case it's a monumental task. And but if you sell it to studio guy, then he's got to come in and still put some time in it, figure out what gear. They didn't have a gear list. They didn't know a lot of stuff they owned. Yeah. They weren't technical. So I just made it as easy as I could with them, and I sent over my assistant and said, go document every piece of gear in that whole building, and let's just find out what it's really worth. Yeah. And put together a bid. And I remember talking to Kemne and going, we should try this. She says, we can't afford that. I go, yeah, I know we can't, but let's just do it as an exercise. As an exercise in maybe one day we will. Yeah. So let's put it together, and even if we fail, we'll know what it costs, and we'll know different things like that, and we'll go through the process, and next time we'll be better. Let's just use it as kind of an experiment. And what's the harm in putting numbers down on a paper and figuring it out? Yeah. And so she said, okay. And so I kind of put it all together, and all of a sudden it looked like I could maybe afford it. But I still didn't have a bank. Yeah. I still needed a bank to buy. It's not like I had the cash in the bank. I just had a down payment. Yeah. And a friend who had other down payment money too. And so I just kind of said, okay, well, worst case, if the worst case happens, this is what it's going to drag us down each month. Can we afford that kind of payment? And we figured out we could. Yeah. And again, Kane was, getting bigger too, so he could start to afford to pay more. And we put it down on paper. They said no immediately, but then a month later they basically came back and said yes. So I think maybe a couple other offers had fallen through for them. Yeah. And they came back to me and said, yeah, well, how about this price? And I said, okay. And then I had to actually go find a bank. So part of the process was done, and that was the fun part. Yeah. Trying to buy gear in a studio. And now the more difficult process was to try to get the financing for it. And this is a funny story too. I'll be as quick as I can. But I thought my best shot at doing this, because banks don't understand studios, musicians. We've had that battle all our lives. I'm sure you have the same battle. So I thought I need a mortgage broker. So I went to a guy that farmed my mortgage out to everybody across the states here. Yeah. And actually I got some people who said yes. So I got, about 3 companies across the country who said, yeah, they'd do it, and gave me an interest rate and blah, blah, blah. And then at the very last second, as I was getting ready to push the button on one of those, this other bank calls and said, listen, we haven't been able to respond, but we want to look at this. Give us another day. So they gave us another day, or we gave them another day. And as it turns out, it was a bank on the next block.
No way.
And so they said, we're sending a guy by now to drive by. And they drove by the building, and to them, it worked out really well, because then it was a legitimate, real place that they could see, and I could take him inside of it, and they could see, okay, this is like the real thing. This isn't just a building. This is like they spent millions of dollars building this place, even though I didn't have to pay for that millions of dollars of the building. But so they gave me a much better interest rate than I could get with the other guys. So it worked out perfectly. So my banker is just down the road, and I go in there, and my daughter goes in there, and they come here to check out the studio every now and then, and it worked out well.
That's awesome.
So that's just another example of, life is weird. I could have been some company in New York that didn't care, but these guys are just a local bank that care. So
yeah, that's incredible.
Bank of the West.
Yeah.
I should say that.
Yeah, why not? So was it a big move coming in here, or was it kind of, did it feel overwhelming, or was you settled in pretty easy?
It didn't feel overwhelming because we were so ready for it.
Yeah.
Everybody, including Kemne, got to refinish everything because it looked quite a bit different than what we wanted to look like. So my wife Kemne was able to make it look really good. Chloe was ready for real challenge. Instead of at my old place, she could pretty much phone it in every day. There's nothing to do. Now she's had her hands full, and she really blossomed doing that. So that's been really cool. But it was overwhelming a little bit, not in the thought process because it was perfect. I was already working. Kane and I were working the first day we were in here doing projects. I mean, it was all ready to go. Yeah. Plus, we brought even more gear. Although it took us some time to get it into better shape than what it was, and we're still doing that now. Yeah. But the financial stress was still a little bit overwhelming in a sense because I had a separate loan for the equipment inside of here because I was going to sell a lot of it because they had lots of vintage mics and lots of things I didn't necessarily need to make records. Yeah. So part of me being able to afford it was actually selling a bunch of the equipment to pay for the rest of the equipment. Yeah. And I didn't necessarily need like a whole bunch of the gear. It's just they had too much. Yeah. But once I got in here and you have access to those vintage mics and you have access to such great gear, you kind of don't want to give it up. And then I realized that a lot of customers and clients expect some of that stuff too. And even if the console isn't that useful to me, it's a great picture taking opportunity with everybody. And some people just rent it for videos shoots and that sort of thing. So the business plan changed a little bit. Also, I'll be very quick on this too because I want to bore listeners. But a month after coming in here, we had a guy come in here and offer us money to buy it. Wow. And Chloe, she fields all the calls, of course, and so she says, "No, we just bought it." He says, "No, we really want to buy it." "No, we just bought it." And then finally she came in to me and says, "Is there a price you'd take?" And I, took what I paid for the studio and times it by 4 and said, "Yeah, if he can pay me this much money, then I'll sell it," thinking I can just go buy another property. Well, he said he wanted to come see it, and so he brought a team of guys, and so they were going to buy it. And it was like, wow, I just made that much money in 1 month of doing nothing. Yeah. But it was going to be a process. He had a board that had to prove it and blah, blah, blah. It was like a business process, but they are very serious. And so long story short, I actually put a month into looking for another building again to build it because now with all the profits, now I could build the studio exactly the way I wanted to, anywhere I wanted. So that was very exciting. So I probably put a full-time month into getting a new plan to make sure I had somewhere to go. Yeah. And then long story short, 6 months later, it all fell through and they didn't end up buying it. But the reason I tell that story is because that was 6 months of not following my own business plan here. Yeah. Then all of a sudden I'm behind the 8 ball because I've let 5 months go by where I wasn't thinking I was staying, where I thought I was leaving, and I thought that the money was going to be awesome and it would be no problem. Then all of a sudden now I had other loans being due and stuff like that, so that was a little bit harrowing. And just because I was working full-time on records, so a lot of times I'd have to get here like at 7 a.m. or like 8 a.m. to do 2 hours of just either administrative work or functional studio work before I could start with my band at 10. And then I work with my band from 10 until 8 at night and then do another hour at the end of that or something in order to just keep the wheels turning here and just keep on improving it here. So it ended up being about 6 months of really hard work and a little bit of financial stress, but luckily I had a couple hits and those royalties came in and everything was great.
Awesome. Well, it's really neat to, see where you've come from and where you are now. You walk through the studio and it's super impressive and your body of work is super impressive. and chatting with you, you can really tell that, you know, you're still who you were back in Moose Jaw days. You know, it's.
I'm just as much of an idiot now as I was then, right?
Yeah. No, it's really great. I mean, I think that a lot of people can get to this position and just be a different person. And I think what makes someone really successful is, you know, you stay rooted to who you are. And that's part of, you know, being a good producer and being a good engineer is just, you know, staying true to who you are and what you believe in and you know, delivering a good product. And you obviously are doing it right.
Well, I think there's so many things that keep me on the same path, and obviously the biggest one is family. I mean, I got the same family I had when I was broke.
Yeah.
So I mean, none of that's changed. And you know, I'm the kind of guy that looks at, okay, well, I've had success doing this way. Why do I want to all of a sudden be a different person now? I mean, obviously it was working, so I don't want to mess it up. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't, you know, I think maybe a lot of people, if you're on your own, like let's just say take an athlete, you're on your own, you're broke, you come from a poor family maybe, and all of a sudden you make all that money, and all of a sudden you got those other people that you've never known before, and they're, you know, it's hard to know who to trust and hard to sort of keep on gauging what you should be doing.
Yeah.
But I don't really have those problems because everybody is growing with me, and everybody's there to keep me in check. You know, my wife will always keep me in check, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
But I count on Chloe to keep me in check too. I mean, it's definitely your ego grows as you do more and more things, and so it's easier to just say, do it because I said, or I'm the boss and that's that. But, you know, I think when you have your daughter working for you who's kind of in charge, she can challenge me, or at least tell me in a nice way when I'm being an ass. Yeah. And I don't think a lot of people really get that in that sense.
That's important. I mean, and you know, she's obviously not going to be afraid to say it. And I think everybody needs someone to put them in check every once in a while. That's what families are for. Yeah. No, exactly right. So, I mean, sometimes it's difficult because it's difficult in a trivial way because I just can't say just do it because you know, anybody who has kids know your kids can argue with you infinity. But you know, now that they're adults, both her and Kane make valid points sometimes, and I tend to listen to them a little more than somebody new off the street. I don't know what their background is. I don't know what they don't know. I know what my kids know, and they've seen successes and failures of ours, and they're smarter for it. And so I think that kind of family environment has really helped it, you know, really helped me stay the same rather than if I was just, you know, a 30-year-old in Vegas with money and status. I mean, there could be a lot of things that go wrong with that picture. Yeah. But not a lot of things that go wrong in mine. So here's a question I wanted to ask you. Being in Vegas, obviously people come to work with you from all over the place. Being in Vegas just happens to you being in Vegas, but do you get work just because there's so much entertainment here? Does any of that spill off over here, or is it strictly just, you know, people coming to work with you?
Well, so there's basically two businesses going on here. One is Kane and my production business of artists that we produce, and honestly, they don't care if we lived in Vegas or Minot. I don't know why I chose Minot, but I just chose it.
That's pretty random.
Moose Jaw. Yeah. Okay, it's probably better. Although it matters a little bit for flights and stuff, so I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. But Vegas is a good international city, so it doesn't matter to be here. In fact, nobody doesn't like writing off a business trip to Vegas. I can tell you that. No A&R person's ever complained about it. No band's ever complained. Yeah. They all find something to do here. So there's that business, and then there's the studio business of just selling studio time, because with 4 rooms, only 2 are ever taken up by Kane and I on any given day. Yeah. So there's 2 other rooms. So that pays a lot of our bills. So for Kane and I, for our production work, it doesn't. We don't get any work locally. I say we don't get any work locally, but that's not true, because Five Finger technically is a local band. Yeah. And lots of other bands have moved here to live now too. So. So we work with local people, but the local scene doesn't really cross our paths really that much. unless we're just looking for new talent or something like that, which there's some great new talent here we've been working with. But it's not like we depend on that at all. It wouldn't matter to us. But for the studio, obviously, being an entertainment city is fantastic because, we get all those people with residencies. They still like to record. So we do get the Backstreet Boys coming here. We do get Carlos Santana coming here. Lots of people pass through town here, while doing award shows and, whatnot that get filmed here. So we've had Miley Cyrus here as she's moving through the city, needs somewhere to record. Martina McBride came here and recorded like an interview one time because she happened to be in town, and so just need a couple hours of studio time. So being that it's Vegas, it really has been great because it's hard to have a studio of this size in a city of this size when the entertainment isn't like it is in LA or Nashville or New York. But all those strip acts and all those kind of let's call resident entertainers, they eventually, there's a couple places in town here that are great studios, and they go to one or the other. So we're always in that fold, and actually, that was kind of the problem they had before with the previous ownership, is they kind of weren't really connected to the music industry in any way, like me. So when Warner Chappell books a songwriting session here, well, I know the presidents of Warner Chappell, so it's like, oh, you own this place? Yeah, okay, well, I'll send more work. So then it becomes that sort of thing. So, the tie-ins to the industry that I have helped it succeed, although it still is in a peripheral market. I'm not in LA. But say I have publishing company like Warner Chappell has a writing camp here every year, and they book like 10 days in 2 studios kind of thing, and it really helps our overhead. So that's not... Well, that in part is because it's Vegas. Because again, nobody doesn't mind coming here. I keep saying that with the double negative, but everybody likes coming here. If it's just because you got 20 writers in town, they need something to do when they're not here, and they got something to go to. They can go see a show. They can go gamble. They can go, do whatever people do here. So it's worked out really well, and definitely, I think the residencies on the strips are getting bigger now too. There's more and more, and even like smaller people coming here and just having a smaller room. It doesn't all have to be the Cher show and Celine and that sort of thing. So all those people need to record somewhere too, and honestly, those people are moving here to live now too, because it's a great place to live. I don't have to mention them all by name, but many people actually have a place here, which is awesome for us because sometimes they want a home studio, sometimes they don't, and sometimes they just want to be able to come here real quick and be comfortable and know people, and that's kind of, and our family environment gives them that friendly feeling without being like just a corporate studio. I mean, they talk to somebody on any given day who's a Churko. I mean, there will always be somebody here, so it's easy to put out fires or to solve any problems or anything like that.
Well, you certainly do get that vibe here. I've toured and been in a lot of big studios, and this felt very comfortable. Like it's a big place, and you've got lots of studios here, but it had a very comfortable vibe.
I think you were just responding to the hockey nets out front.
Yeah, I know.
No, I mean, people say that, which is surprising to me because this is really the only way I've ever known it. But I remember have worked in other studios, even this one here. I mean, the funny story about this studio is that when I did the first Five Finger record, I did that in my house, and they wanted to do the making of and reverse the making of. So we actually rented this studio for a half day to come here and take pictures.
Oh, no way.
And in fact, sitting right where you're sitting now, I sat there and they hired a guy to come take pictures of us like we were working here. And instead we were working in my kitchen. So it was cool to come full circle and now buy the place I used to pretend that I was actually working it. But in that family environment, I mean, you just don't get around. I mean, all our people we're all connected to. It's not unlike being a band in the old days. Like for Thanksgiving this year, we had 4 people from the studio over to the house, which usually people spend times with their families, but these 2 guys, well, 3 of them were from out of town. So it's like, you don't have your families, well, come over to our house. Now that doesn't mean that I expect them to do their job any less good than what they do. But that kind of, I think, attitude is just the way that we've always been. My house is always kind of the drop-in center for different, people. And so even though my house necessarily isn't that now, but the studio isn't even that, but it is really about the relationships. We just like to keep them for long term.
Yeah.
You know, like I was telling you, I introduced to our chief engineer. He was here 5 years before me, and now he's been here for 3 years with me.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a part of the fabric here. And the first day that we moved here from my old studio, this guy had been, you know, here's another good example. My assistant, his name is Tristan Harden. He was hitting us up at our old studio to try to get work for like 2 or 3 years. And I didn't have any work. I had a guy. I didn't need him. But when we moved here, I needed some help moving some stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And told Chloe to call him. And he canceled a trip to, I don't know if it's Disneyland or Slipknot, the Knot Fest or something like that, in order to help me move some equipment. And he's been here ever since.
Wow.
Started as an unpaid intern, and now he's like, you know, he can work as many hours in a week as he wants.
Yeah.
So that gives me comfort, having relationships like that with people that, you know, I can depend on and I get to know. And his girlfriend works here, and you know, I guess it does end up representing family. I still see more corporateness here than I'd like.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're used to real corporate studios, it is probably a lot different.
Yeah.
You know, than someone being able to just poke their head into Chloe's office and say, "Hey, there's no toilet paper in the bathroom."
Yeah.
You know, that gets solved fairly fast.
Well, a couple quick questions, and I'll let you obviously get back to work. If you had to, I want to go a little geeky for a second. What's your favorite piece of equipment in the studio? If you had to pick one thing if you had to leave this place and had to only take one thing with you, what would you take?
I would say my Donette snare drum.
There you go.
That we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great sounding drum kit, and it thrills me that a friend of mine actually built it. So, I mean, that's just bonus. But even if it wasn't him, you know, I'm glad it found its way here. So that's from an acoustical point of view.
Yeah.
I would say the UTA Unfairchild is my next one, which that's my vocal chain now. So even though I had an actual Fairchild here when I bought the place, that is one of the premium pieces of gear I end up selling for probably almost as much as my first house cost. But that let me buy a bunch of other great gear, and the Unfairchild is one that's just ended up living up to its hype, and it's also very expensive, but it's been pretty useful to me, I would say. Yeah.
All right. Second question: hockey.
Vegas Golden Knights.
Yes, you're a big fan.
Yeah, well, I mean, I played hockey as a kid, of course, like most Canadians do, but I mean, I quit probably around 13 or 14, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and I was never awesomely good or anything like that, so it wasn't a hard choice. But it's, you know, and then it kind of left my life for a long time. I kind of poked my head in and out, you know, as the years went on. You know, our band used to play in Calgary a lot, and so back when the Flames were doing really well, so Theron Fleury and Doug Gilmour used to come down to the bar and get up on stage and play. So, that's I mean, again, I was a huge fan at that time because they were making a playoff run and all that. And then moved to Switzerland. And then, you know, Vancouver wasn't as big of a deal there. But yeah, since the city has got the Knights here, life has gotten a lot better for us.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hate to say it. I mean, it's got better for me, but I can even see it, you know, just in people. I mean, you got 2 million almost people from different parts of the country have some things in common, don't have other things in common, but now we do. We got one thing in common.
Yeah.
Other than gambling. But gambling isn't even a thing that people have in common because most people who live here don't gamble.
Yeah, it's transient.
But hockey is definitely one thing for a city in the desert that knew nothing about it. I mean, it's amazing, and it's a different viewing experience when you go see a hockey game here than in an old school hockey town, because you'll be sitting there and there'll be like a delayed penalty and your goalie will start skating off and you hear 4 questions behind you. Why is the goalie going off? Why is the goalie going off? You know, they don't understand all the rules yet and they don't get it all, but luckily there's pockets throughout the stadium where people are telling everybody. It's kind of like you're explaining hockey for the first time. Yeah. So it's been very exciting, and the fact the team did so well that first year, I mean, how long did Toronto wait? I mean, even last year they did so great. Yeah. But the Knights scored more points in their first year of existence than at that time than Toronto had ever gotten in a year. I mean, that just doesn't happen.
No.
So
yeah, it just.
And my friends are quick to remind me this year that this should have been our last year, and last year should have been this year, maybe. But this year's not over yet. That's all I can say.
No. Toronto's actually doing pretty good this year.
I'd love Toronto to make a deep run, or the Jets too. I mean, look, before I had the Vegas Knights, it didn't matter what Canadian team it was because I didn't really have a team.
Yeah.
I loved them all. So it's like whatever Canadian team makes it to the playoffs, you just have to cheer for.
Yeah.
But now that there's Knights, unfortunately, there's one American team I will take over top of a Canadian team. Sorry.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for spending all this time, and it's been a really great conversation.
Cool. Thank you for coming.
I want to, at a later date, maybe sometime when I'm back in the future, do a podcast just talking about gear.
Yeah, I'm sure we could probably spend hours and hours on that.
Yeah.
There's no shortage of talk here,
Yeah, but I appreciate it, and good luck with the studio here and everything, and it was a real pleasure for you to take your time and do this. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
All right, let's wrap it up.